Hi there, Andrew Cressy is here with Audiobro. I thought it would be a good idea to make a video that I would consider pro tips for the Eternity Adult Choir Library. This tutorial will not feature a lot of audio examples, but I think it will be very helpful in streamlining your workflow when using Eternity as well as other libraries that use our orchestral engine. In this video, these are the topics we're going to go over. You can click on the chapters icon to skip to the next section if you want, but I would watch this entire video at least one time, just to pick up on certain things that you may not already be aware of. We're going to go over assigning CCs to Auto Divisi, assigning CCs to sustained staccato mode, epic staccatos and how to create them, articulation volume knobs, short syllables, long syllables, legatos, etc., reverb use, using your own reverb, look ahead, saving time and adjusting numbers, using a piano track, consistent playback and using the split patches, and RAM management. Let's get started. Assigning CCs to Auto Divisi. One of the first things I do when I set up my template for a new library is to assign CCs to that library. In Kontakt, there are a couple of ways to do this. One is to right-click on the knob or control that you want to automate, and then wiggle your hardware controller to assign it to that knob. But perhaps the more reliable way is to use the MIDI automation browser, because it will show you what is already being used, and in this way you are not cannibalizing previous settings. I like setting up Auto Divisi with CC30. To do that, navigate to the Ensemble page and either right-click on the Auto Divisi button and wiggle your hardware controller, or drag CC30 from the MIDI automation window to the Auto Divisi button. So here we're going to grab CC30 and assign it to the Auto Divisi button. Now, when I adjust my controller that's already assigned to CC30, Auto Divisi turns on and off. Notice when you switch the Auto Divisi on and off, the look-ahead milliseconds change from 0 to 50 milliseconds. Of course, you can use whatever CC you prefer. I just use CC30 because some of our libraries are already set up that way. Here is a list of pre-assigned CCs in Eternity. Also, please do not use CCs marked in red. You should not assign those because those are already being used internally by Eternity. Now, let's look at assigning CCs to the sustain and staccato modes. There's a very easy way to switch between sustain and staccato mode with Eternity with a single CC, but it's a little different from assigning a traditional CC to Kontakt. If you look closely at the sustain and staccato buttons, right below them, you'll notice a tiny triangle. If you click on that triangle, you'll get a drop-down menu with all the available CCs for that control. It's pre-assigned to CC17, but in this example, I'm going to change it to CC15. Now I can switch between sustain and staccato mode remotely with CC15. And note when I click on the triangle again, the CC assignment has been updated to CC15. You can get even more mileage out of the CC assignment. If you look at the top of the menu, you'll notice these options. The first option simply switches between sustain and staccato. The second option switches between sustain and long staccato and short staccato. And the last option lets you switch between all the options: sustain, long staccato, short staccato, and both, where both long and short are layered for that extra oomph. Now let's look at epic staccatos, how to make them. So by default, Eternity loads with Auto Divisi on. This gives you the most realistic balance of voices among the sections. But sometimes you want that larger-than-life sound. For that extra epic sound, it's very easy to simply turn off Auto Divisi. Make sure you select both on the syllable length slider and it will sound bigger. What this does is layer the short and long length samples together for that bigger sound. Here's an example with Auto Divisi on. Now here's another example with Auto Divisi off and the syllable length set to both. Notice how it will sound bigger. It's very useful if you want that extra power. Now that we looked at how to make syllables sound more epic, let's switch gears and cover a very important aspect of syllables. mainly controlling their volumes when they're layered with the sustains. So let's discuss articulation volume knobs. The default values of 0 dB should work in the majority of the cases, but sometimes on delicate parts, or if you think a certain syllable or transition is poking out, you can lower the volume to suit your needs. Doing this with CCs is the easiest in my opinion. Sometimes you may want a softer entry for a sustained note, and this can be achieved by lowering the syllable for that note. Let's listen to an example. Simple and easy. By design, the long syllables are less staccato than the short syllables. So if you're using short syllables and you're finding that some of them are poking out too much, my first approach would be to switch to the long syllables. And if that doesn't work, I would lower the volume of the long syllable. Moving along to reverb use, using your own reverbs. By default, Eternity loads with reverbs on. But anyone who has been doing this for a while has a wonderful choice of their favorite reverb plugins. While we think Kontact's built-in convolution reverb sounds pretty good, for CPU considerations as well as sound fidelity, we recommend you use your own quality reverb plugin. If you load a bunch of our patches, you will get convolution reverbs installed on each patch, which adds unnecessary CPU versus using your own digital audio workstation's effects sense. Let's look into Look Ahead, saving time and adjusting the numbers. Look Ahead is a huge time saver because it automatically corrects for the natural rhythmic differences between syllables and vowels. Look Ahead also provides you with what we call a best fit for most situations. Depending on your material, you may want to further massage the MIDI. Here are some tips for getting the most out of Look Ahead. Start playback one measure before the MIDI part. This will ensure that Look Ahead has enough time to, well, look ahead. If you feel like the choir is dragging or rushing in general, try adjusting the negative track delay on your MIDI track. Depending on your tempo, mic choice, and whether you're using syllable speed or not, these numbers may vary between larger or lesser negative delays. And finally, 3. Sometimes you'll need to shift specific MIDI notes in time. But in general, we have found that using Look Ahead will save you a lot of time by getting you very close in most cases. Okay, moving along. Using a piano track. All syllables have different attack timings. This has nothing to do with sampling. It's just the nature of singing. So sometimes I find it useful to use a piano to record my MIDI syllable parts without any of their performance timing distractions, especially if it's at a faster tempo. I just play a piano phrase and quantize it, because I'm not a very good piano player. And then simply copy that MIDI part to an Eternity track. Let's listen. So here's a piano part. Now let's quantize and copy the MIDI to an Eternity track. It's that simple. Let's move on. Consistent playback and using split patches. Audio Divisi is a huge time saver and inspiring compositional tool. But when you want to get completely independent control of each voicing, you'll want to use our Divisi split instruments and record one line at a time. It is more work, but in addition to independent control, if you turn off Audio Divisi, you will get the most responsive and time-accurate playback because you'll be omitting Audio Divisi Engine's chord detections and release detection windows. So to set up a split patch for single-line writing, simply load the split patches and turn off Audio Divisi. So for example, here I'm loading the men's tenors and the men's basses, and I would be using 2 different MIDI tracks to record their MIDI, 1 track per patch. Okay, last but not least, RAM management. Managing RAM using Eternity is very simple. Mainly, you can purge the sections you don't want on the ensemble page. or you can turn on or off the syllable speed mode on the performance page. Both of these will have an impact on the RAM footprint. For example, if you're not going to be using syllable speed on a project, definitely turn that off. Also, it's good to know that Kontakt is very good with RAM management. If you load up one instance of Eternity and load a second instance of the same patch, you will not be taking up much more RAM, since Kontakt shares that same sample pool with the different patches. Okay, I think that does it for my tips for today. There are a lot of different ways to improve workflow. You may have found different ways that work better for you, but I thought that some of these tips may be of value to you. I hope they help. Thanks for listening, and take care.